joint meeting of the Carson City Open Space Advisory Committee and the Parks and Recreation Commission to order. It is Monday, June 17th at 5:30. My name is Bruce Scott. I'm the chair of the Open Space Advisory Committee. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to ask the members of the Open Space Committee to introduce themselves. We're integrated tonight, so we're scattered around amongst the two committees. Then we'll turn over to Parks and have Parks and Rec Commission have them do the same. So with that, and then after that, we'll have the roll call. But let's get everybody introduced first, and it's nice to see everybody here. Margie, I'll let you start as a member of the committee, and we don't need a brief introduction or anything. Just who you are.
I'm Margie Evans, and I am a member of the Open Space Advisory Committee.
I'm Joanne Michael. I'm also a member.
Gerald Masad. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Yep, exactly.
Donna Inverson.
And I'm Bruce Scott, and I think we have our vice chair.
Jeremy Hall, Open Space.
All right. And we're going to do the same for Parks and Rec. So I'm Leanne Keever, and I am the chair of the commission. And I will have Joe start off the introductions down there, and we'll work our way around.
Joe Cassiopo with Parks and Rec Commission.
Brett Long, Parks and Rec Commission.
Leah Cartwright, Parks and Rec.
Dave Whitefield, Parks and Rec.
Lori Bagwell, Parks and Rec.
Kurt Meyer, Parks and Rec.
Okay, with that, let's go ahead and have the roll call. We've already determined that we have a quorum, but go ahead with the roll call.
Chairperson Scott, Open Space Advisory Committee, Chairperson Scott.
Here.
Vice Chair Welch. Here. Member Evans.
Here.
Member Hall.
Here.
Member Inverson.
Here.
Member Masad.
Here.
Member Michael.
Here.
Ex officio member Filson. I know this is her last day, right? Here. Parks and Rec Commission, Chairperson Keever. Commissioner Cassiopo, Vice Chair Cartwright.
Here.
Commissioner Cassiopo.
Here.
Commissioner Bagwell.
Here.
Commissioner Long.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer.
Here.
Commissioner Whitefield.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Are there any public comments at this time? We'd invite anyone who'd like to address the joint group on an item that is not on the agenda that we won't be talking about. That if we will be talking about it later, we'd ask you to hold your comments. But if there are other public comments, please feel free to come forward. Introduce yourself if you would.
Hello, my name's John Paul Kyle. I've been a resident of Carson City for about 28 years now. And I'm here primarily to address the Parks and Rec Commission. And over the 28 years, I've come to know many of the recreational opportunities in Carson City very well, from open space to trails to the soccer fields, the baseball fields, the pool. But most recently, I've become very aware of the tennis facilities in Carson City. My son, Ryder Kyle, has become quite a tennis fanatic, and he's become very good at it, and he is now beginning to attend tennis tournaments, and as he wants to not just play tennis, but compete. I have 4 comments with respect to the state, basically, of the Carson City's tennis courts and at various parks and at Centennial Park. When local courts become unplayable due to poor surface maintenance, local residents lose access to tennis play in their neighborhood. As tennis court surfaces at Centennial Park deteriorate, you lose capacity with respect to Parks and Recreation's tennis summer camp. Fewer playable courts mean less participation. Court surfaces are becoming unsafe for play at Centennial and other pocket parks in town. If the Centennial Park tennis facility is allowed to deteriorate as it is now, there will never be an opportunity to hold a tennis tournament in Carson City. Currently, players have to travel out of town to attend tournaments. I have an opportunity loss example for you. Most tennis tournaments are 2-day events, and travel out of town to attend a tennis tournament is very expensive. I know because I just attended a tennis tournament with my son in Lafayette, California. Between event registration, fuel, meals, lodging, an event can easily cost a family $500 to attend a 2-day event out of town. Put another way, for every tennis family who lives away and who does not participate in a tennis tournament in Carson City, the local economy loses $500 per player. Those dollars now go to Reno, Lake Tahoe, Sacramento, and the Bay Area. If a tournament includes 32 players, that's a small tournament, the local economy over the course of that 2 days might see $15,000 to $20,000 funneled into that community. To support local tennis players, your tennis summer camps at Centennial Park, and to even dream of holding a tennis tournament in Carson City, your tennis courts must be maintained. And so I hope to have you look very carefully at your CIP budgets and take a look at tennis and tennis courts and your tennis facilities. I know that other tournaments in town, softball tournaments, soccer tournaments get your attention, but perhaps someday tennis tournaments might get your attention too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kyle. We are not in a position to talk about that, but I'm sure that the Parks and Recreation Commission will consider that as a potential future agenda item.
Thank you.
Certainly do that.
Any other public comment at this point in the meeting? Yes, Ann.
Mr. Chair, if I can just take a brief moment for recognition. We are retiring Maritza Filson's name plaque this evening. She is here with us in the audience. She has graduated high school. To inform the Parks and Recreation Commissioners, for the past year and a half, we have had a high school student join us in ex officio as she was introduced. And so we would just like to recognize her. The picture on the plaque is of the Ham open space acquisition, property acquisition. And the picture really signifies open space, who we are and what we're about. So the picture, and this is displayed on the property up there, it does say the property was sold to the residents and visitors of Carson City. Thank you to everyone who supported the purchase of this 206-acre property to protect open space, scenic views, wildlife habitat, and trails for the benefit of the public.
Thank you, Maritza. You're going to have to address us. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing and where you're going to be next year.
So next year I'll be attending the University of California, Davis, in Davis, California. I plan on studying international agriculture development, and I hope to work for either a nonprofit or the government to work with third world countries to help improve their agriculture production.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for your service to the Open Space Advisory Committee.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to take a shot at Marissa? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we take 1 minute and get a picture of the Open Space Advisory Committee with Maritza?
I think that would be great.
I guess.
It's Monday, man. It's work from home day.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much, Ann. Other public comment? Yes, Lori.
So I just wanted to, real quick, read in a letter that I received of praise for some staff. I think we often don't have time to do that, so I would like to give a public shout out. My name is Daniel Copa, a Sparks resident. I am writing you to praise two Carson City employees, Mr. Nick Wentworth, Parks Maintenance Coordinator, and Miss Antoinette Hill, Secretary. Both Mr. Wentworth and Miss Hill were very helpful to my brother Donald Copa and me about an improvement project we plan to undertake regarding the family grave site at Lone Mountain Cemetery where our grandparents are interred. The plot has been in our family since 1919. Recognizing a responsibility to tend to the grave site, we decided to refurbish the plot and to coordinate efforts with cemetery staff so as not to run afoul of Lone Mountain Cemetery regulations. Don and I cannot speak highly enough about Mr. Wentworth's and Miss Hill's assistance after they learned the details of our project. They could not have been more supportive and helpful. Their cordiality, commitment to service, and their expertise made our task easier. They answered our questions completely and suggested local Carson City merchants where materials could be obtained. In closing, Don and I thank Mr. Wentworth and Ms. Hill for their support, advice, and to you, to the mayor, as well as Carson City staff for having such competent and dedicated public employees that were never too busy to assist us. By the way, the gravesite was completely refurbished this month. I just thought it was important to give a shout out. Jennifer, could you see that a copy of the letter is placed in Nick and Annette's piles? Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we have minutes for both committees. We'll start with the April 15th, 2019 Open Space Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Donna?
On page 3, the first paragraph, about 2/3 of the way down, it says Mr. Bollinger.
Okay, any other comments or corrections? Do we have a motion?
I move to accept the minutes for from the April 15th, 2019 meeting as corrected.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. You have minutes there.
All right. Okay. All right, has everybody read on the Parks and Rec Commission? Have we all read the February 5th, 2019 Parks and Rec Commission minutes? Are there any changes or modifications to be made? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes from the Parks and Recs Commission from February 5th, 2019.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you. Are there any modifications to the agenda?
No modifications.
Okay. All right, our meeting items. Number 3A, review and discussion regarding Halen Harrison's Eagle Scout project for Sea Hill. Ann?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With us, we have Mr. Halen Harrison, and he will present his Eagle Scout project proposal for the Sea Hill area.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Halen Harrison. I'm in Troop 44, and this is my Eagle Scout proposal slide. This is the location of the project. It is the Sea Hill Trailhead at the base of Sea Hill. Sea Hill is a symbol for Carson City. The sea, everyone can see it all around our city, and I think the trail should definitely be improved because we have tons of runners coming every week, and it's a landmark for Carson. These are the phases of the project, which will be held on separate days. The first phase will be the parking lot improvements, where we are just gonna put a new base and a new layer to the main parking lot. And the second day will be refurbishing the kiosk and fixing it up. For the parking lot improvements, the first step is gonna be surface leveling. The second is spreading of base and gravel, and the third step is compaction. The surface leveling will be we're going to be leveling like base, and the scouts. Second day will be my scout friends, and the first day will be all the heavy equipment. And on the second day, we'll be taking care of the hand raking and shoveling and keeping dust down with water truck. And the second day is also similar. Hand raking, shovel work, and watering will be done by my fellow scouts, and heavy equipment will be on the first day. Compaction will be probably on the second day, and we will be using vertical compactors and vibrator plates to get everything nice and smooth and compacted. And the second phase of the project will be all handwork. We'll be clearing brush around the sign, adding base to the area around the sign. We'll be removing the old staples from the wood, sanding the wood, and sanding and painting the metal posts. There will be shovel work. We'll be removing the bush. We'll have watering to keep down the dust, and waste piles will be built to get all the junk out of the area. The adding base around the kiosk will be using shovels, and we'll have a base pile in the area, and we'll have the compactor to get everything firm in that area too. The staples will have all the pliers, and all the scouts can do that. And the sanding the kiosk, we will be using electrical orbital sanders and palm sanders, and we'll be getting the sand smooth and ready for new signs to be put up. Sanding and painting the metal posts, we are going to sand the posts to get rid of all the grime and rust, and then painting it to give it a shiny new look. This is the safety. The safety protocols will be taken care of during our project are, before the project, we're going to hold a pre-work safety talk, where everyone is required to wear long sleeve pants, long sleeve shirts, closed-toed shoes, and safety glasses. And for people running the machines, we will have hard hats. There'll be lots of water, and we'll have people monitor the work, make sure everyone's staying safe. We'll have a first aid kit on hand, sunscreen, there'll be lots of it, and we will have a authorized OSHA instructor on site. My project dates are going to be July 12th and 13th. That's a Friday and Saturday. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Halen. A pretty ambitious project.
Yes.
And it sounds like you have some friends with equipment.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's great, and a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Comments or questions from either of committees? Yes.
I'd just like to say your overall program looks well thought out. It seems you've thought of everything, and I'm pleased that you're undertaking it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so how many other scouts are going to participate?
There'll be about scouts and their parents, about 30.
30? Wow.
Are you roped moms and dads into it?
Yeah.
And then do you have an estimated cost for the project, or is everybody contributing their own?
Everybody's contributing.
Everybody's contributing?
Yeah.
Well, then, thank you, Mr. Groth, too, back there, for the heavy equipment I saw. Looks like a wonderful project, and thank you so very much for contributing to the community.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Halen, one thing you might want to consider, I didn't see it in your presentation, is a shade structure. It's going to be the hottest time of the year.
Yeah,
Not a lot of shade out there unless everybody can crawl under a sagebrush.
we have one and we'll set it up.
Great.
In that same vein of safety precautions, I have spent a lot of time with an orbital sander recently, and a dust mask saved my lungs. So I didn't see it on your PPE list, and if you need any, I can maybe rope some for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we can get some. Thank you.
Margie?
I just wanted to, where did that voice come from? I just wanted to comment about the snake situation. You know, you're gonna be removing some shade and refuge, and I want you guys to be super, super careful that you're not disturbing any critters up there. They might leave from the vibration of the work the day before, but I wouldn't count on it.
Okay, we will take that into account.
As much time as I've spent up there, I've never been in the parking lot. And I wasn't even aware that there was a kiosk there. What's going on the kiosk afterwards?
There'll be it'll mostly highlight the sheep project that goes on every year, where they come and eat off all the extra stuff on the mountain. And there'll be the coyote warning signs and the usual.
I would strongly recommend that you put up some leave no trace.
Okay.
And I know I have the link to the website that has those wonderful "It's Your Duty" posters. Wasn't that Tahoe Fund? I looked on their website and I know what you're talking about. And they're beautiful posters for "It's Your Duty" and the butt one, and they're beautiful posters because that's a serious problem up there. Also, there's some issues about what parts of the trail are public and we're crossing other land. Can we do a map and respecting private property?
We can certainly do that. With the time frame of this project, we probably wouldn't have time to complete it by mid-July.
But it would be really
But
nice
correct.
to have something to really explain to the public about what is public and what is private, and respecting private property, I think would be very nice to have on
It's a
that.
great idea.
Thank you. Halen, would you please be sure and get a list of the people who participate
Okay.
and made donations? And if you can get that to staff, and if you can look for that, or that'd be Margie.
I thought of something else you mentioned in your presentation, but I think this question is more for Ann and park staff. You said you're going to make it compliant with the signage master plan.
Yeah.
Paint colors, or in what ways are you doing that?
I am not sure. The person I was working with, he would tell me the day of, so I am not sure.
Halen's been working with Greg Berggren on this project.
Okay.
And we are internally coordinated, right? Yes. Great.
Jennifer's.
Yes, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Bedge, Parks and Recreation Director. First, thank you so much for your presentation and all of your hard work. This is going to be a big project and it's really needed. Given that it's going to be July, it's going to be really hot, and we talked about shade, but I worry about fire. And when you use hand tools or heavy equipment, there's a real risk for even just a small spark, and we don't want you and your friends to get hurt, and we definitely don't want Sea Hill to burn down. So
Okay.
I would definitely make sure that you have a fire suppression plan, so have a fire extinguisher on site and some shovels so you can cover anything with dirt. And I'm sure your heavy equipment operator will help you, and a water truck. Okay, so just want you to be careful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any public comments? Okay, great job. Thank you, Halen.
Thank you.
It's nice to see a project that goes from start to finish in less than a month.
Sorry.
Okay,
Being kind.
Jerry, that's enough. All right, item 3B, discussion and possible action regarding a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to rename the Centennial Park Archery Range, is it Meigs Archery Range? I shouldn't be introducing this one. Tim Meigs, okay.
Come on up.
Who is,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request from the Clear Creek Bowman. This was from the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting that we continued to this item because we didn't have a quorum for that last meeting. So I do have members here from the Clear Creek Bowman to talk about their request and what their intent is for this item.
thank you. Gentlemen. Please introduce yourselves if you would, and it's nice to see you here. I'm a little concerned about your company, but Jim, good to see you.
You have to push the button.
Oh, there we go. Good evening. I'm Tom Howe. This is Jim Davis. We're from the Clear Creek Bowman. And we're here to request a formal name change for the Centennial Archery Park in honor of our club founder, Tim Meigs, who passed away in February of this year. With your approval, we have some handouts that we'd like to give everyone and give you a little background on Tim.
The information starts on page 12.
Yeah, the article you're going to, it starts on page 12, was done 2 years ago. And it's just a very short article, but it sort of highlights Tim and his history in the area. Tim was a artisan of international renown as far as producing handmade archery equipment. He and his wife were instrumental in founding the Clear Creek Bowman 40 years ago. And I'd like to turn it over to Jim now. He's a charter member of the club, and he can give you some in-depth background on what Tim meant to the community and what he's done for the club.
Jim Davis with the Clear Creek Bowman, and I'm a charter member. Actually, the club started in 1973, and the reason we're the Clear Creek Bowman, we're out east of town now, east of the golf course, but originally we started up Highway 50 just above Clear Creek on the Schultz property. And but anyway, Tim was the founder, and he's kind of legendary in the archery community. He hunted with Fred Bear and a lot of Howard Hill. He made bows for Howard Hill, and he was pretty humble about it. He just, you would have never suspected his dusty little shop was producing these high-quality bows. And again, he founded the club, got it going, but if you needed help as a kid, as a group, he just wanted to promote archery. He built bows, not just here, but in the Bay Area for over 60 years. And he was like I say, just a humble individual, and he had this little dusty shop. And if you needed help with anything, starting a club, or if you were the Boy Scouts and needed information on building a bow, he would be happy to help you. And he started the club, and it's gone on actually 73, so we're about 47 years now. And Tim he just knew all about archery. He's world renowned. He hunted with and shot in tournaments all over the world. And again, he didn't say too much, but it still amazes me that he had his shop right here in town for 40-some years, and you walk into this little building, and here's this guy, just in this dusty little shop that had an incredible amount of information on archery and was willing to share it with anyone that asked. Anyway, he has done so much for archery, not just in this community, but all over the world, really. In the Western communities, his bows are more like artwork than they are. You see one of his bows, you go, oh, shouldn't that be on the wall? You shouldn't think you wouldn't even be out shooting it, but he made them to shoot. And anyway, we would like to rename the Centennial Park archery range to the Tim Miggs Archery Range, and we do have people that call up and we say, oh, it's the Centennial Archery Range, and they go over to Centennial Park. So this would also give it a little distinction, a little better location. So anyway, we're here to ask for a name change, and we're hoping you can help us out.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to turn this over to the appropriate commission.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your presentation. I had no idea we had a person of such notoriety in our community. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, does anybody on the Parks and Rec Commission have any questions or comments for these gentlemen?
Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know Mr. Meigs before today, before you introduced me to him, and I just spent a little bit of time just searching online about him. So in addition to the comments that you've made, I've also found people online talking about how amazing his bows are and how amazing he is as a human being, and this is, from around the world. It's coming up in a Google search. Will you be providing any kind of plaque or just something people can read information about him at the archery range, or is that already there?
We've already put that up. We had a stone for his wife with just her name on it, but once Tim died, we got a granite. It's on a granite boulder that we placed, and then there's an inscription on it, and it tells as much as you can and on an inscription there at the archery range that kind of tells who he is and why we wanted to change the name and that sort of thing. It's visible right there at our kiosk in the parking lot.
Commissioner Bagwell?
So maybe just a question for you and/or staff. So will this require us to do much in the way of a name change out there on signage? Or do we just have one entry sign into that?
Thank you, Supervisor Bagwell. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. The signage is pretty minimal out there, and we've actually met with the Clear Creek Bowman on site to talk about our signage master plan and trying to improve the signage up there. So it's probably a good opportunity to be able to do that as well. I did provide you with a copy of the resolution that guides this, so if you have any questions, whether it's allowed or not, it definitely would, but it would have to be at the pleasure of your recommendation to the Board of Supervisor.
So you're aware of the sign master plan then, and will help to get the naming done
Yes.
according to our, great, thank you very much.
Any other comments from Park and Rec? Commissioner Long?
This just goes back, actually, I believe, to last meeting, but I think the question came up and we discussed the Bob Boldrick Theater. And it really boils down to things being named after people and what the significance is, and really how, whether it's appropriate or not, and what the, I guess, what the future holds, or what the plan is for future parks. I think in this case, in what you provided, and obviously the fact that the park pretty much was probably created, as well as, like, he left a legacy. So if any park was gonna be named after somebody, this one probably should be. There's others that are maybe a bit more on the fence of, there might have been a chairperson behind it, but there wasn't really like a passion like this driving it. So I think it's an appropriate one to do. The only comment would be similar to Bob Boldrick. I think we did add Carson City on the end of Bob Boldrick also, so that people coming from out of town or somebody who may not be familiar with him would have, I guess, that context clue of we have, make sure we say the name correctly. Tim, is it Meigs?
Tim Meigs.
Tim Meigs, Carson City Archery Range, or something to that effect.
Yeah, that would be no problem.
So much. Does anybody on the Open Space Commission have any comments or thoughts on this? Like to weigh in?
Chance. I just, it's a good example. We got some sleepers in our community that we don't always realize are there. And this is an opportunity to really, I think, recognize them.
So that being said, we can take possible action. Oh, exactly. But before we do, is there any other public comment on this subject? Come on down. No?
Commissioner Kieber,
Commissioner?
I have one question, I guess, also. I haven't actually been to the archery range. Do you drive in Centennial? So my recommendation about Centennial, is that appropriate, where you drive into Centennial Park where you park to go to the
No, actually, that's Jim's comment about the confusion. We've resorted to putting a large archery sign up. We're right next to the entrance to the storage facility up on, just before you crest the hill going into Mound House. And until recently, they had the Centennial recreation sign down by the entrance, almost the entrance to the golf course. And that also reflected the archery range, had the archer on the sign, and that was a big confusion point. So the club has made a gigantic archery sign to put on our horse fence at the entrance. So that sort of gets some people's attention, and it's helped a lot. Just recently, the road department, I guess perhaps Carson City did, I'm not sure, they put a individual archery small sign up at the entrance road to the archery range, which again helps some.
Sure. So Jennifer, question, would that be still considered? I guess I'd refer to the master plan if the city still refers to it as Carson City. If not, then my recommendation would be null. Is it part of the Carson City or the Centennial Park or not?
Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director, I think that's a really valid point. It is an extension of Centennial Park. I would even consider the golf course as part of that park. But I think adding Carson City, we have regional events there, people drive in from all over. So I think that would really be helpful from a regional perspective
And then just
to include
the signs
Carson
on how to
City.
get there. Okay.
Yeah, and we recognize we need to work to improve the signage and help people. And then that large sign is actually great because you can see it from 50 and know where to turn, because it is confusing.
Any other comments or thoughts? Any other public comment? All right, so refresh me, Ben. On the motion, do both commissions participate or just the Parks and Rec Commission, or how would that be best suited?
Ben Johnson, Deputy District Attorney for the record. Under the naming resolution, it's a recommendation by the Parks and Rec Commission. So although open space is free to add comment, it would only be a vote by the Parks and Rec Commission on this item.
Well, I didn't want to overlook them and make them feel left out. All right, and then on that note, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
All right,
A motion to rename the Centennial Archery Park, the Tim Meigs, Carson City's Archery Park? Park Range? How would you like, is it range? Park? Archery Range. So instead of that, Archery Range. So Tim Meigs, Carson City's Archery Range.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a second. Any discussion?
On discussion, and it was a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to rename it.
Okay. A recommendation.
We
to-
don't get to actually rename it, but we'll give
you
it a
might.
strong
Throw-
send.
throw a
I might.
recommendation too.
I'll carry your motion forward.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no discussion, all those in favor? Aye. The motion carries. How's that, gentlemen? We'll rename the archery range for you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay,
for
we
coming and-
appreciate that. It means a lot to us, and he has family still here. You're more than welcome to keep those.
We'll use them for the board.
Yeah, and it still kind of boggles my mind that we had somebody like him in town, and people didn't know, but in the archery world, he was an icon, you know,
It
known
sounds
all
as though
over.
he was something special.
Yeah, he was.
When are you going to have, shall we say, a re-signing ceremony, a grand opening type of ceremony? And if so, would members of the public be invited?
We had at our annual banquet in May, is when we had the dedication of the plaque, which physically is at the range now. And it was well attended, and everybody appreciated it, along with his granddaughter and existing family were there as well. So it was a pretty nice event.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Kiever?
Yes.
There's one question about the motion, whether it was a singular or plural for Carson City. Think my recommendation was for Carson City would be singular, just similar to like what was done with Bob Boldrick. And Kurt, I think you may have said Carson City is plural. Do we?
I meant to duplicate what was done
Done
at
with
the
Bob Boldrick?
Bob Boldrick. I thought it was Carson City's Community Theater.
Okay.
It's possessive, not plural.
Okay. It's possessive, correct?
Show ownership.
Sure. And I guess I just want a consistency between each of them, so I just want to clarify it.
So did we clarify?
Are we clear?
We can clarify it at the board
Okay,
level.
thank you.
For the minutes and such, correct? Okay.
Okay, item 3C. Discussion only, presentation by Carson City Health and Human Services regarding smoke-free efforts throughout Carson City. Review and discussion only regarding smoke-free efforts in the parks throughout the region. Jennifer?
You're unplugged. Thank you, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. We've been working with the Health and Human Services Department on this topic and had long discussions. Previously, we did have an item that went before the Parks and Recreation Commission about this. In your packet, you've been provided with a couple resolutions of neighboring agencies that have adopted policies and ordinances for their jurisdiction. And this is an open discussion, and it's not related to just parks. It's definitely related to our entire park system, which includes open space lands. So Tony's been wonderful and has a presentation for you to give you a background of Carson City's efforts, and then we'd appreciate your feedback on where we go next.
Tony Orr, Carson City Health and Human Services. I'm a public health nurse, and I'm doing tobacco prevention, among other things for the city. So I just have a really quick presentation to talk about smoke-free parks.
Just meant I had to restart the computer.
Couple of jokes would be fine, Tony. Oh, I don't mean to make you uneasy. No, no, don't worry.
Maybe if anybody on the committees has any questions about vaping, Tony can answer any questions.
Are more people vaping than used to use cigarettes?
Well, the younger generation, yes. We have a big problem in the schools. Right now, probably about 20% that we know of, it's probably much higher, are vaping in our schools pretty regularly in both Carson and Douglas counties. 50% have at least tried it, and some of them, most of them are aware now that it is nicotine, but prior, a lot of them thought it was just smelled good and something new. But we have different products. They're very, the fourth generation e-cigarettes are, work very well. Juul is one, but we're also seeing a lot of Novos and smoke badges, which are very small and can fit in your hand. But now they're even brazen that they're using vapes that are like about this big, and they just take them out in class and in the bathroom, and they have a lot of secondhand exposure to what they call vapor, but it's really aerosol. It's not water. It's more, it has benzene, and when it heats up, that's when you get the chemicals, the formaldehyde and all of that. It's bad for, has carcinogenics, bad for your lungs. Nicotine is bad for especially kids under 25 because they are susceptible to the nicotine and the dopamine release, and they become more easily addicts in other areas, other drugs.
Is there any research that shows how many then graduate to cigarettes?
Yes, they're doing the studies now. They're doing all the studies on vaping in a hurry because it went from this is a new product to we now have an epidemic and we're having really big issues with the kids because vaping does not have the same stigma that cigarettes does. You don't smell the same. You smell like strawberries or, cookies and cream. You don't smell like that potent, pungent smell. So they can cover it up with perfume, and there's more nicotine in them. They get more nicotine. So they're seeing more overdoses and some seizures and different things from having higher nicotine levels. They're also doing studies on stroke and heart disease because it does the same thing. It, restricts the vessels, things like that. I guess I should talk to you about what I'm here for. I can just keep talking, it's okay.
Well, I just was in general on vaping. You hear all the advertisements that this gets people, it's a step down off of cigarettes, but is it not as bad or worse than the cigarette? So it's really a false premise? Is it?
The CDC says that cessation, they do not recommend cessation with vaping, with vapor, e-cigarettes. However, personally, I've been an ER nurse for 14 years, and I've seen people that come in that have smoked their whole life. And when I read literature, I think that there is less harm in vaping than there is in cigarettes. And so if they're going to be a 2-pack-a-day smoker and they're not going to quit and they don't want to quit, then they may want to look into that. But the problem is you do dual use, and then you're getting all of it. You're getting all the bad stuff. And honestly, we don't know how bad it is yet. We have years and years and years of studies and data that tells us that cigarettes are bad for us, that secondhand smoke is bad for us, that thirdhand smoke is bad for us, just a touch. And so we know that there's bad stuff in this, but we don't know how bad. And that's what I don't know if you know DRI, which is a Desert Research Institute. They're doing so much in figuring out what's actually in the vapor. Their studies are amazing. So they're kind of high in the research area, and we have them in our, Vera's amazing. She's the doctor that does a lot of this, and she's absolutely knowledgeable. Just amazing to talk to. So let me switch. Okay, so we know that 83%, next, yeah, they know who I am, so we'll just keep going. So we know that 83.4% of Carson City residents don't smoke. Yeah, yeah, that's kind of surprising when you think about it, right? Because wherever you go, you kind of smell it, and the casinos are so bad and other places. But honestly, there's 83% of the people that don't smoke, almost, 83.5, right? The Surgeon General, of course, says there's no safe level of exposure of secondhand smoke. And secondhand smoke is the third leading cause of preventable death, which is kind of sad when you think about it, because secondhand smoke means you didn't choose to do that. You didn't choose to smoke, and you're still going to die. So, next slide. Yeah. So this is just about secondhand smoke. It's linked to several health conditions, heart disease, stroke, lung cancers. There's like a ton of cancers. Usually if you get one, that metastasize, goes everywhere. Respiratory irritants, allergies, and it's harmful to young children. It can bring on anything from ear infections to sudden infant death syndrome. So that includes like all the respiratory, bronchitis, pneumonia. And it brings on long-term disabling diseases that cost a lot of money. Next slide. So just what we talked about, that the vapor isn't actually water. There's small particles. Usually it rips off some of the metals that are inside of the vape. So you're inhaling like nickel and a bunch of other metals, heavy metals. And it has, I always get this word wrong. I don't know why, because it's not that hard. Dicetyl, that's actually the food. It's in your food. It's the different food flavorings they're actually FDA to be ingested. They're approved to be ingested, but when you breathe them in, they can cause things like wet lung and popcorn lung. So it kind of rips your lungs apart. Yeah, it's not good. Next slide. So these exposures can trigger anything from an asthma attack to heart attack. And it's not, it's all secondhand smoke. It's not just cigarette smoke. It's also the aerosol from the vaping. You have short-term, long-term exposures. Go ahead and switch. That's one of our parks. So smoke-free parks and open spaces provide tobacco and smoke-free venues and living, encouraging families to get involved and attend smoke-free events. So we're trying to do that a lot. That's a lot of what we do. We try to make smoke-free events and change policy so that it's smoke-free. And then it also forces the adolescents to comply. YRBS, we already talked about this. This is a youth risk behavior surveillance that is done every 2 years. And we know that at least 20%, it's more just from the kids. I just did a presentation to kids at Carson High School, to the health department, to the health classes, and it's more than 20% that are vaping. Just from listening to them talk, it's pretty scary. And we talked about nicotine in the adolescent brain. So we're going to go on to cigarette butts. So I don't know about you, but everywhere I go, I find a cigarette butt on the ground, right? People, I don't know, they just don't make it to the garbage or wherever they're supposed to go. They're toxic. Globally, that's 4.5 cigarette butt filters per 4.5 trillion cigarette butts that get thrown out on the ground globally. It takes 10 to 15 years for them to break down because of what they're made of. It also, when they get wet, they keep the toxins inside of it. So when they get wet, they seep out into the soils, and they're poison. So they're poisonous to children who pick them up when they leave them in the play area. They're poison to animals, and they're both wildlife and domestic animals. Next slide. So that's the toxic waste. I already talked about them being toxic, got ahead of myself. So they're also, we're getting more calls to the poison centers because kids have been, that's actually the picture in that's a jewel pod. So the vape products are very potent and can, they're absorbed through the skin. And so we're getting more calls between eating cigarette butts and actually like chewing, kids put everything in their mouth, getting the actual e-juice on their hands or all over the place or in their mouth because it smells good. So it smells like berries or whatever. I have some cookies and cream, and I also have some Jolly Rancher, because if you didn't know, it comes in 8,000 flavors. So one jewel pod has 59 milligrams per ml, and kids are mostly body, water, so they absorb it very fast. It's also, next slide, fire hazard. So National Fire Protection Association says that 130 million in direct property damage for wildland fires. I didn't even take into consideration the new stats because between the campfire and all that, it's like way up there. The most common, the biggest cause of fire is human activity, and smoking materials is 10% of those fires. Sorry, there we go. Next slide. So I could only find one study for the maintenance cost, and it doesn't really, we're so much smaller, but it would kind of relate because we are smaller, so we have less staff to help pick up. And so San Francisco did a study, and the cleanup was 22 cents a pack of cigarettes, and it costed them annually $7 million to pick up the trash, the tobacco trash. And one more thing about the fire hazard. Vaping does not seem like it would be a fire hazard, but there's been 2,035 explosions that we know of between the years of 2015 and 2017 that were reported by the hospitals. So if they were reported by the hospitals, those are just the ones that actually somebody got hurt. So those aren't the ones that aren't reported, where they just exploded. So I just thought I'd mention that. And then next one. And we're at the end. Just a little food for thought, hopefully to bring it to the attention. Maybe we could do smoke-free parks and open spaces.
Thank you very much. Are there comments or questions from members of the committee or the commission? Joe.
Just our local efforts, I know we're not smoke-free necessarily, but what kind of efforts do we have in place right now?
Really, right now, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director, we have very minimally, unless the health department is involved right now. They've offered to help provide signage, they have grants, trying to work with a lot of our event organizers that are in parks, just to encourage them to do the right thing and having smoke-free events, not only to help take care of our parks and open spaces when they have an event, but it's a lot less to clean up, and it's just the right thing to do. In particular, any youth-related events, we've really tried to encourage that. I did provide you 2 copies of ordinances in Reno and Sparks that have been passed by those city councils. Washoe County has theirs in final draft. It just hasn't been approved by the county commission yet. They're all a little bit different based on what their needs are. City of Sparks has identified designated areas, especially in their sports complexes, because they realized they couldn't fully enforce this and they still wanted to try to accommodate it but reduce the impacts. So at their sports complexes, they do have designated areas for this type of activity. City of Reno did share with me that it became a problem with contractors because it's difficult when you hire a contractor to do work in a park, and then you put that as in a condition, and they found bids were coming in higher because they thought it would be difficult to regulate with their contractors and their staff that would come in. So there are some operational challenges with this. To remind you of the previous conversation we had at the Parks and Recreation Commission, designated areas were a really big issue, and the commission felt really strongly at some of our regional parks that designated areas should be provided. There was a big concern about our open space areas in particular, obviously fire danger and trash. The trash mob folks can really tell you that this is probably the number one thing that they pick up constantly are cigarette butts and related trash. So it provides negative impacts to our wildlife habitat, our natural resources, our waterways. It is, a burden in our parks as well, and open spaces for trash-related efforts. So there might be something we could do to compromise on moving forward, and we'd appreciate any comments that you had, and then we can either bring these back to both boards or maybe something in the December meeting if you wanted us to draft something with the district attorney's office for your consideration.
I have a comment and a question. When we went to the fair last July, August, whenever it was, there were signs up all around saying no smoking, and people were ignoring it, which leads into the question, how do we enforce if we pass such a thing? Do we have the cigarette police come out? I mean, not to be a smarty, but just wondering.
It's a practical challenge that we would have. Our park rangers do have citation authority. If there was an ordinance approved and authorized by the Board of Supervisors, this would be, I believe, a misdemeanor offense and something that our park rangers could enforce. For me, it's all about education. I don't want people to run out writing citations everywhere. It's just stopping people, educating them. Hey, did you know, this is a smoke-free event. Can you please put that out? Here's a receptacle. And it's really more of education over enforcement approach. But having that code or that ordinance as a backup, it would be probably a last line of defense if we had a difficult problem, especially if there was fire danger. I'm sure the fire chief would appreciate something out in our open spaces. So you will see people out running, walking their dogs, and they'll have a cigarette in their hand. And if they just throw that, in 90, 100-degree weather, it is a real problem.
Would just the park rangers have the enforcement ability, or would the sheriff's office deputies as well?
The sheriff's office would, but our park rangers are most likely to come across this type of situation.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question and a comment that may change based on your answer. Is the grant funding that was talked about for like tobacco prevention and signage and all of that, is that contingent on like an outright prohibition on all smoking, vaping, or is it dependent on something else?
Sorry, not necessarily dependent. It's just whether the money's there and what we can work out and what the signage would have to be. And
When you say it depends on if the money's there, so we don't currently have grant funds to use, we would have to apply for them.
we're going into a new cycle.
Okay.
So we have to make sure that I get a certain amount of money from the CDC and from Healthy Nevada. So once we figure out, we'd have to figure out budget and how we would get those and what we want to get, what kind of signs we want, that kind of thing. I have some, but we would probably want something more related to the park and open spaces.
Totally. So then my comment, I have a really hard time with outright banning things a lot. That just, especially when we're attaching a citation to it, and we know that people who use cigarettes and use vape products, they tend to be the younger folks, they tend to be lower income, and I don't know if the citations have a fine attached to them, but it could lead to just, I don't want people to feel unwelcome in the park, and that goes for smokers and non-smokers. And then keeping in line with making sure that we have our ordinances geared toward our population and who's around here. If we do something like, prohibiting the use of disposable and single use, so that would help with the cigarette butt, the trash, because we know that littering is terrible, and, we have taxpayer funds going to clean that up. And then also fire prevention and making sure that people aren't starting fires throwing their cigarette butts out. So prohibiting disposable and single-use tobacco and vape products in public and open spaces. And then the reusable products that people might use, limiting their use to when there's no children around or people who have, like I have asthma. My sister, I make her go outside to use her bubble gum flavored whatever it is, right? It's disgusting. It's absolutely terrible. It has 0 nicotine in it, but it's gross. But I want her to go outside with it because I don't want to be around it. So if we can limit use when there's no children around, or, if somebody says, hey, I have asthma, please don't use that around me. That might be a little easier on enforcement than an outright prohibition. Just throwing that out there.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Donna.
I have to say, in other states and communities, especially other states, are ahead of Nevada as far as prohibiting and things like that. And what they have seen historically is as they start prohibiting, smoking goes down. And it's a struggle in the beginning, and people fight it. But they do see a reduction in overall smoking, and then you see more and more people self-policing. And people then feel like have a right to say something, whereas non-smokers do not feel like they have a right to say something now. Please, stop smoking around my kids. Now they can say, hey, it's illegal, don't smoke here, my kids. And eventually it becomes the norm not to smoke. And as Jennifer said, trash mob. I run trash mob. Let me tell you, it is so frustrating when we are sitting there picking up cigarette butts less than a foot from the trash cans. Hundreds of cigarette butts less than a foot from the trash cans. Or I'm a hiker and I'm out on the trail, I'm picking up cigarette butts when I'm, inches from dry brush. It's terrifying. I'm all for banning because it's a hazard. Think about this. If we don't start enforcing this and stopping this, you could lose your homes. So I'm absolutely for it.
Yes, Jerry.
I am absolutely against it. And I'll tell you why, because there's no point in coming up with an ordinance that, first off, nobody's going to enforce, and second off, that's going to infringe on the rights of people that are over 21 and are making their own decisions. Now, I get if you wanted to ban smoking in parks, but I heard earlier today that the golf course is part of Centennial Park. So who's going to police this thing? I mean, who's going to enforce it after 5 o'clock on a Friday night? You have 2 rangers that are taking care of, I don't know how many acres of parks and open space. They're going to go write citations about somebody smoking cigarettes? No, not likely. So to pass an ordinance that cannot be enforced is worse than not passing it, I think.
Other comments? Joanne?
I guess I'm middle of the road. I think there should be a compromise. I think there are some areas like the children's parks, I think should be probably outright banned without designated areas, but certainly some of the larger venues could have designated areas. When you look at, and then when you're looking at what was passed by Sparks, they don't charge a person with a violation unless that person continues to engage in the conduct after they've been asked to stop. So just because you walk into a park and don't know the law or are unaware of how it's ordinance of how it's changed, and you get caught smoking a cigarette, you're not going to be outright fined initially. It's only if you are asked by actually they have a city employee, officer, or law enforcement officer asked to stop and you continue to engage, then you can be charged with the violation.
If you can't control the smoking in schools, how are you going to control the smoking in parks?
Yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
What if we didn't necessarily pass an ordinance, but put advisory signs up, such as this is a no smoking area, around the kids? I'm just thinking of Mills Park as a microcosm of this, but around the kids' play structures and so forth. But the gentleman that's just going for a walk around the park that works across the street of the state, who wants to smoke a cigarette, isn't being harassed, and he's staying away from the kids' area. So in other words, instead of an outright ordinance, just areas that are suggested not to have smoking and let other people do what they want to do. And the enforcement thing is kind of null and void.
I'm kind of curious what agencies that have the more remote trails, Forest Service, Park Service, state parks, where you're away from a facility, away from a trailhead, what sort of ordinances have people put in place, Sparks, whomever? I'm just not, I'd like to get more information, what are people doing?
We can, it's definitely a nationwide initiative, and that's why Reno and Sparks followed. There was actually a task force for Northern Nevada. Chair Keever sat on that task force as well. Each agency came back to their commissions and kind of modified based on what their need was and they felt what was appropriate for their organization. For that specific one, I can look into some agencies and see what they did and bring that back to you guys.
I was also curious as to whether people are looking at seasonal issues, such as, during the dry season, you can't shoot, right? Are we going to do the same thing for smoking, just in terms of fire safety?
Go ahead, Margie.
I know one thing that I used to be a smoker. I am not a smoker. I don't like being around smoke, but I do know that the Forest Service had a requirement that they did not allow smoking above a certain elevation during high fire periods. I don't have a problem with that kind of a ban on open space, but I have a serious problem with making people feel like criminals for doing something that's not illegal. I am against an outright ban. And we're not Sparks, and we're not Reno. We're Carson City, and we're different, in my opinion. That's why I choose to live in Carson City rather than Reno or Sparks or Washoe County.
Brett or Joe?
Well, it spurred my thought about, sure, an all-inclusive ban sounds pretty tough. I don't think the intent is to go after the guy that's in the park on his own smoking a cigarette. I think if people were responsible and did the right thing, we wouldn't have to come up with laws, but unfortunately, the reason why we have to is because we have people that will push every aspect to the limit, to the point where it affects people around them, and that's where we're at. So I think it makes sense when we're in parks and we're around congested areas, whether it be kids or whether it be adults. I don't want to go. Years ago, we went to Mills Park to watch the fireworks, and we chose we're not going to do that again because people are congregated around smoking and there's a plume sitting over you. I don't think that I should have had to leave because of that, but I chose to. That would be a reason and an enforceable area where something could have been done. And I think that that's more of what we're talking about. We're not talking about somebody that's out in open space enjoying their cigarette. And I feel like the intent of the law isn't that. It's that you have to have something that you put in place now. Years ago in airports, people smoke all over. And who paid for it? We all did. What did? They give them a place to smoke. And even the smokers didn't want to go in there. They ended up taking them out. Now there's no smoking. So I myself think that there should be some probably initiative. We looked at this as Parks and Rec probably 5 years ago. And the same questions came up. Should we just put signs up? If we go to the effort of putting signs up, I think there should be something to back it so you can enforce it when you need to.
Without getting into whether or not we should have an ordinance, I mean, I've got my opinions on it, but when we talk about fire danger, what are the statistics? How many fires, or do we have any statistics that say over the course of a year, so many fires are started by cigarettes?
NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection, the only listing they had was 10% for cigarettes. They didn't have whether there was any vaping fires, only one house fire that they knew of. But it was 10% is what they listed for cigarettes for wildland fires.
So maybe just some general thoughts, and I'm not so sure a particular ordinance is necessary unless we already don't have these covered in other ordinance. And so I often find while you're after the smoking in the parks, and you're saying that 4.5 million cigarette butts a year or something, so we should utilize our littering ordinance that's already in place. And if we enforced that a little bit, it might get the people to do the intended consequence, which is put the cigarette butt in the trash. So I think you already have a rule. We just don't implement that either. The fire danger issues should be handled within our fire protection codes that deal with WUI and some of the other issues where we could put in, you're at a certain elevation, a certain time of year, things like that, where we could develop the signs to say it's a fire danger to smoke, whatever, between May and September or whatever it is. I like the idea of considering events, and that might be the area I'm most interested in, that I do think it's wrong to have a major event and I can't enjoy it because everyone is smoking. So maybe a designated smoking area when you have an event that exceeds a certain number of people, so that everyone can enjoy the park or the special event that you have arranged. And so you make a designated smoking area. And I think those, and then the kid zones, I do like, again, if we have a little playground for little kids, I think it's okay to say you can't smoke there. But I think that'd be the right baby steps, maybe for Carson City, because I think I agree with everyone. You don't want to outright ban things that are legal, but I also want to be appropriate for littering and fire danger and the lungs of small children. So maybe we can come up with some compromises that we all start meeting a goal, but we don't ban cigarette smoking in the parks.
On the, if we're thinking about the baby step of banning smoking in parks, would it be parks with playgrounds under a certain age limit or only when children are present? I live near a park and there's not always kids there. I walk, right by with my dogs, and not all the time are there kids hanging out in there, but sometimes, somebody's on the bench on their phone, taking in the scenery. Just throwing that out there too.
Yeah, this is an item for discussion. And I think perhaps both the Parks and Rec Commission and Open Space might want to provide some input for future agendas as to whether you'd like to pursue this further, have staff come back with an ordinance. I don't know, is there any formal recommendations that Carson City Health would have? I mean, you've obviously painted a pretty clear picture of the issues. And I don't say that to put you on the spot, but if I understand it, your intention here is an educational one, not an advocacy that we have to, or we should be doing this or that as far as ordinances or that type of thing.
I just feel that it should not be in parks. I mean, I don't smoke. My parents did, my grandparents did. I was in the car with them when they smoked. And I kind of feel like I shouldn't have to smell it when I'm going to the park, you know, even with or without my grandkids, you know. So I feel like if it was up to me, I would say no. But that isn't really my decision. I just educate and then I do what I can to, you know, help things make people better and maybe not as much disease.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think a
Sure.
lot of us grew up with secondhand smoke, didn't really know it at the time or think about it. You can certainly make the argument that things are maybe a little different in parks than they might be in open space in terms of the area. But it would seem to me that the individual Parks and Rec Commission or Open Space Advisory Committee may want to have a future discussion or agenda item. I would be more inclined to, I think, have the individual commission or committee talk about it among themselves, because I think there is a slightly different focus there, if there's an appetite for that. And so I guess I would ask Open Space, and then we'll turn it over to Parks. Does the Open Space Committee, would you like to have this item on a future agenda? Do you want to wait to see what comes forward with Parks? Or do you want to take the information and give it some further thought before we consider an agenda item? Don't all speak at once.
I'll speak, since I have my little light on over here. I'm not against, I mean, I understand the consequences of smoking. I just can't see how anybody at Open Space is gonna enforce this kind of a proposition anywhere in Carson City ever. I mean, it'd be a fluke if if a park ranger happened to walk up to somebody while he was on open space and was smoking a cigarette and asked him to put it out. I mean, it'd be 1 in a million. So I don't see how it even affects us. I get it for parks, I get it about the kids. I don't know how you're gonna legislate parents smoking in a car with their children like my parents did, but, you know, if that's what you guys think is the right thing to do, I just don't think there should be an ordinance that can't be enforced.
Any other comments from Open Space? Margie?
I'm open to having a further discussion on it in the open space forum. We have an awful lot of things that we have projects that we need to work on. So I think it's as high a priority as some of the other things that we need to be paying attention to. But I would not mind a bit having a conversation about it, because there are aspects during dry season or something like that that I think need to be looked at.
Okay. Joanne, did you have a thought?
Well, I think we should have further conversations on it with respect to open space. And whether it's an ordinance or not, I think just even having on our kiosks, educational signage that warns people, because some people truly don't know. I mean, the person who threw the cigarette out of the gondola up in Heavenly 10 years ago probably wasn't thinking twice about it. They just flicked their cigarette out and huge wildfire after it. So I think just from an educational standpoint, it could be something very easily put on our kiosks to state that this is high wildfire danger, period. You know, careful with your cigarette ashes, and or stay on marked trails, or put your butts away, whatever.
Yes.
One comment about, certainly is a difference between a lot of open space and parks, but we also have some similarities, and I think we're gonna have some more similarities in that we have events out at Silver Saddle. We're talking about having events down the south end of Prison Hill, and I think it'd be confusing for the public to say, oh, am I on open space or am I in a park? Which regulation applies? And just from a consistency and educational standpoint, I think I would be remiss if parks went ahead and say, okay, we're going to create these designated areas, that we didn't at least talk about having that being consistent between the two groups.
Okay. Am I accurate then in hearing a general consensus among the Open Space Committee members that at some point in the future, you'd like to see a further discussion item on this matter? Is that? Okay. Do we want to let the Parks and Rec Commission take the lead in terms of having a little more intense environment, if you will, so that we could understand any action they took? Do we want to, I mean, we don't take an action tonight, but education obviously can happen at any time and be beefed up in any way that might be approved or recommended. But what's the nature of the committee? Should we consider having it on a future agenda when we have a better feel for what the Parks and Recreation Commission does? We've had a lot of discussion tonight. We're not moving towards a decision other than what further discussion might ensue. Kurt.
With the last commissioner's comments, possibly we have these meetings twice a year, is that correct, that are joint meetings? With taking into consideration that, and I agree with, where am I, open space or a park, that might be a good topic to have on an agenda for a joint meeting.
Other thoughts? Yes.
Thank you for the recognition a third time. At the last meeting, we had like a public poll that was on Facebook maybe about renaming the community theater. Is it possible to do something like that to get more public input? I mean, just before, if we are going to have it at the next meeting, which I think would be a good idea, sometimes it's difficult to come and sit here for a couple hours, but maybe people would participate in a Facebook or Twitter poll.
We can always do a survey. We've had really great success with feedback. I think some tighter direction would be good, though, because I don't want people to freak out that we're going to try to, ban something across, and get them the wrong direction. So perhaps maybe at the separate meetings at Parks and Open Space separately, we can have a robust discussion, and then maybe in December when we have the joint meeting again, or even next June, if we have too many other project priorities, then we can bring back together and say, Parks really feels like with events, we want to do this. Do you guys agree? Let's talk about events, and then we can kind of come together and share that information, if that would work for the two boards.
Would the members of the Parks and Rec Commission be comfortable in bringing this at our next meeting, and we have an extended discussion on this, and then our findings or our discussion could be shared with the Open Space Committee? How does everybody feel about that?
So I think that we're on the right track. I'd like to see it on the Parks agenda then as an actual action item, because I don't think we can direct staff or direct preliminary results over to the other section. If we are going to work towards an ordinance, I think it should be on the joint one. And again, just a personal preference, I want to work on things that fit both groups. I think I overall agree with Alan that I see it as all one system, and I hate to try and figure out which place I'm in. Is Silver Saddle Ranch in or out? And so I think maybe if we could have it as an action item to really help get the discussion so that you could do a survey and see what top 5 things the public supports, because maybe it is events and littering and.
Children's playground.
Not even that way. I even thought you could say you can't smoke within 15 feet of a child. And then we don't have to discuss it. It's not a zone, it's not a designated area, it's just don't smoke near children and forget it and make it easy. But again, just some thoughts.
And I think I have I have enough information to go on. I can follow up with the fire chief. I can do some additional research based on the comments that you had here, and then we can report that back to both commissions.
North Las Vegas, I think it was a week ago, just passed, you can't be within 100 feet of a kid at play in their park. So.
Just for Jennifer, if we're going to have this as an action item, I'd like some information provided to us. I'd like to know what our current ordinances or laws are regarding littering and things like that. And we can talk about it during discussion. I'd be careful about wording, how we word things. When you say you can't smoke within 100 feet of a child, and in a park, and kids are running back and forth, that might be a challenging way to do it. But I think if, within a play structure, things like that, we can talk about. But I'd like to know kind of what's on the books already. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I would echo what Joe just said. Also, I think it might be helpful if we had more information about what the CDC might recommend, what organizations nationally have done, what there might, what ordinances. Maybe, I know we got Sparks and Reno, but what have other states done? What have other localities done? And how have they handled some of the questions that came up tonight about enforcement and so forth? Because these are tricky, but I think it's an important issue. I didn't realize some of the statistics that you gave were pretty alarming in terms of both health issues and the trash issues and so forth. And so I think we should give it some measure of priority. I don't think it's something we should sweep under the rug. Thank you for your presentation. And I'm assuming we can depend on you as a support for this kind of research?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, for the record, Nikki Aker, Director of Carson City Health and Human Services, and I really appreciate you all listening to Tony's presentation and the discussion here tonight. Of course, someone asked, what's the recommendation? I've got to stand up as the director of the health department and say, of course, my recommendation is smoke-free parks. I just want to give some history that in the past, we have put signage in the parks. There was no teeth to it at all, but just to please don't smoke around children within the park. So we have done that in the past. Tony and another person under the grant, Bailey Barber, have been very active in getting signage at different events. And yes, like you say, the signage is there. Some people don't listen or don't look at the signage and don't abide by it, but at least when a lot of the people that go to these events and they see signage like that, they will abide. We've been working really hard to get that message out. But again, thank you for listening to this and being willing to at least move forward. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one question,
Okay.
if you don't mind. I have a question. I would be really interested in when the other municipalities implemented such smoking prohibitions in public parks and such, the public's reaction and what sort of education or techniques were used to win people over, if you will, or if there's still resistance to these different prohibitions.
I think there's always some resistance, but there's a lot of social enforcement too. Once you have a sign, people can say, hey, so there's a lot of social enforcement, not just law enforcement or parks and, ranger enforcement.
But I would still be interested in how the municipalities, what educational techniques they used, if it was social peer pressure, or if there were some, shall we say, criminal offenses associated with it. You hit somebody in the pocketbook, they're gonna listen. But again.
That's
you
true.
don't
I'll have
wanna
to look that up.
Impoverish somebody, just.
Right.
If we could accomplish it without treading on too many toes or ruining, taking away a person's right to do what he or she wants to do to his body.
I think that pretty well ties up our discussion. If open space committee members are comfortable, I suggest we defer to Parks and Rec to let them go forward with an agendized item. Very honestly, I hate to see both committees go through this on two different occasions, and I would suggest any open space committee members that wanted to watch or be part of the Parks and Rec discussion be there, so that when we come to open space, we'll hopefully come with a better informed and a more focused approach to the specific recommendations or the specific action that Parks and Rec might have taken. Okay, is there any final public comment? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next item, 3D. Presentation from the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District regarding the Integrated Watershed Integrated Watershed Program and Project Overview. Ann, are you introducing that one?
Yes, I will. For the record, Ann Bollinger, Open Space Administrator. With us this evening, we have the real pleasure of Miss Brenda Hunt, because it is also her birthday, and she chose to spend it here with us this evening. Brenda Hunt is the Carson River Watershed Program Manager with the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District, and the CWSD that, as an acronym, we like to use the acronyms quite a bit. They do an amazing amount of work throughout the watershed. And when we say watershed, we're talking about a bi-state agency. And so with that, let me set up this presentation for Brenda, and she will inform both committees more about what they cover.
Thank you, Ann. Brenda, it's nice to have you here. Thanks for coming. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And please proceed.
Okay. So again, my name is Brenda Hunt. I'm the Watershed Program Manager with the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District. I'll be providing you with an overview of our watershed program and what we do and how we partner with Carson City. And the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District, as Ann said, is a bi-state, non-regulatory governmental body that promotes cooperative action across political boundaries within the Carson River watershed. So we only deal with the Carson River watershed. The Carson River watershed consists of the 6 counties that are up here, and there is a little teeny bit of Pershing County that doesn't have any people living in it, actually. There's about 4,000 square miles in size. The elevations range between 3,000 out in the Carson Sink to over 11,000 feet. The precipitation is between 4 and 8 inches out in like the Fallon area and up to 40 inches in the Sierra Nevada. The Carson River itself is about 184 miles in size. Has very limited upstream storage, so in comparison to the Truckee, for instance. And the river is fully appropriated. It's also important to know that the Carson River is on the 303D list of impaired waters under the Federal Clean Water Act, and it's listed as a priority watershed in the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection's Non-Point Source Pollution Management Plan. Next. So the Watershed Program aims to harness the public and private efforts to restore, conserve, plan, and manage the watershed's resources and limit the impacts associated with non-point source pollution on the river. And I'll get into that in a little bit more. This integrated process and the principles it embodies are used to actively bring together our diverse public and private parties that have a vested interest in the health of the Carson River. This process looks at the watershed as a whole, includes natural resources, the physical landscape, and the people who live here. The Carson Water Conservancy District works to ensure effective and efficient communication lines are maintained among our partners and our stakeholders. So after the 1997 flood, that was a really huge impact on the watershed. The CWSD was asked to take on this integrated watershed approach. And that's when the Carson River Coalition was formed. This is basically just a huge watershed-wide stakeholder group. And it is not, it doesn't have any, it's not a body, it's more of an advisory, it plays an advisory role. There's over 150 organizations. This is just a few of those that are a part of it. And we meet a couple times a year. Usually we have a very large watershed forum at least once a year, and then we usually have a smaller CRC meeting. Next one. So this Carson River Coalition formed in 1998. We specifically have some subcommittees that meet more regularly. So we have this river corridor has actually just been changed to now be the Floodplain Management Working Group because it wanted to incorporate the alluvial fan issues as well and not just be focused along the river. We also have an education and outreach group that meets regularly. And we have an invasive species group that meets at least annually to discuss all the different issues across the watershed. And we sometimes have other ones that might not be as regular, but we've had water quality, CRC sort of working groups before, or recreation. So the CRC acts as a steering committee for this watershed planning and management process. And as you can see in the picture, Carson City staff, open space staff, and public works staff regularly attend these meetings. So our work, CWC, we work with the watershed communities to enhance the river system, to protect the floodplain from development in particular, ensure we meet our future water needs, and educate our citizens about watershed issues. Next. Some of the current challenges that face the watershed are many. So water quality issues, water supply issues, loss of habitat, erosion of soils and riverbanks, invasive weeds, construction and urban development, urban runoff, the legacy mining that we have. We've got 2 Superfund sites in Leviathan Mine and the Carson River Mercury site. All of these issues, sometimes it's loved to death. There are certain places on the river that are being loved to death, and they're really being impacted, such as the Hot Springs area up in on the border of Alpine County and Douglas County. So, and also we have limited funding to implement these projects associated with all these programs or issues. The challenges impact the watershed's ecological functions, our social fabric, and the economic vitality of the area. So the CWSD uses effective planning measures to meet our responsibilities under the Clean Water Act. We have a stewardship plan in place. It was originally done in 2006. We just updated it in 2017. This plan contains all the elements necessary to meet the EPA's requirement to receive what's called Clean Water Act Section 319H money. This funding supports CWSD programs, including myself. It was adopted by CWSD and has also been approved by both NDEP and EPA. So NDEP is the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. Over 30 organizations, federal, state, Carson City, nonprofits, private citizens, everyone was involved in the creation of that plan, including local tribes as well. We have, this plan allows anyone within the watershed to apply for 319 funding. So it's a really essential component of our watershed. You have, there's only, I think, three places actually in Nevada that have a plan. And how the money is designated is 50% of that funding can go to kind of any state program, but 50%, we get to access 100% of the funds where they only can access 50% of the funds, if that makes sense. So the plan is separated into 7 main components, or project categories, and often it provides a tracking mechanism for river projects and management measures. We also have a floodplain management plan that recently was originally done in 2008 and has been revised in 2018. The plan specifically promotes the living river concept, and all 5 communities along the Carson River have adopted the plan and the recent update. The Carson River Watershed Literacy Action Plan basically lays out how CWSD and our partners could help provide outreach and education about watershed issues throughout the watershed. The plan basically is to make sure not just that people are aware, but to actually ask them to act in ways that benefit the watershed, so that over time we will have an improvement in our water quality. So that's the whole idea. So Carson City is a really active participant in all of these planning matters. They have been involved in the creation of the plans and in implementing the projects and programs that are espoused in them. In addition, CWSD is a state of Nevada's designated 208 planning agency for the Carson River. So we've updated that plan for a 20-year horizon in 2005. So soon we'll be coming back and updating that plan again. So that's kind of many of our plans anyway. Move on. So CWSD works at this regional level, and I like to say we plan, we coordinate, and we fund projects. And we use our funding through the ad valorem taxes that we receive from all the different counties in the city to basically leverage additional grant funds. So we really do try to leverage all the money that we have into more to do as much with it as possible. And there's only about 5 of us that work in this agency, so it's a really concerted effort to do that. So these are the categories in which we work, and these are the main categories that are part of the stewardship plan as well. And all of the CRC helps work on those categories. So I'm just going to go through a few of these, the categories, and give you little bits and pieces about how we work and how Carson City is benefiting and also being helping implement these plans. So Floodplain Conservation is a key CWSD and CRC program. As the purpose says here, it's to create a long-term vision and strategies for floodplain management to reduce flood damage impacts. Objectives outlined in the plan, including managing economic development without sacrificing floodplain and river form and function, ensuring public safety, both upstream and downstream, protecting private property rights while conserving our natural resources, protecting and improving wildlife habitat and water quality, and providing connectivity to the river and its floodplain. I would say that Carson City has done an amazing job, an outstanding job, in fact, on helping us meet the goals of this plan. There have been, the river is basically in public ownership in most instances. So you've been really, really proactive in helping with this plan. So the Floodplain Management Working Group that I mentioned before that helps steer and implement the suggested actions in the plan. And so Carson City has helped in in nearly all of these categories, probably in all of them, from open space protection along the river, as I stated, to higher regulatory standards for your floodplain management ordinances and flood awareness events. You've kind of done the gamut. And CWSD is a cooperative technical partner with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and has helped obtain funding for several projects, Carson City projects. So including the restudy and remapping of Gonai Canyons and Eagle Valley drainages, as well as a drainage study for North Carson City. All right, so invasive species. I know you guys are going to hear a report on invasive species in a little bit here, but it's a major concern impacting the ecological and economic integrity of our watershed. Weeds and aquatic invasives, they can increase soil erosion and stream sedimentation because they take over the native plants and animal niches. They reduce water quality, they decrease wildlife habitat, alter ecological processes, reduce recreational values, and impact agricultural productivity. CWSD staff attends all the CWMA meetings, which are the Cooperative Weed Management Area meetings throughout the watershed, so that we can stay abreast of the issues that are facing each area, and you can kind of learn then what other new threats might be impacting or maybe potentially going to impact other areas within the watershed. We work extensively with Ann Bollinger, Lindsay Boyer, Marina Dispro, and helped to fund weed management efforts and leverage those dollars with other grants from BLM, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the Department of Ag to continue the fight to manage invasive species. So, water quality, CWSD works with our CRC members and Nevada Department of Environmental Protection and we are looking at these several reaches that are on this 303D list and trying to implement projects that help meet the water quality standards, to help them improve these areas so that they meet the water quality standards, which they don't at the present time. We also, we work with, these projects are outlined in the stewardship plan, and so that helps. So when you go for funding for these, then you have those projects outlined, and it all kind of works together to say, oh, okay, we're gonna go and do that project, and it's already been in the plan, and we can move forward, and it helps leverage those funds better. Okay, so our current pollution issues, not the historical ones that we talked about with the mining and the like, are all from non-point source pollution or polluted runoff. That's what it basically is. It's from these various activities that you can see on this poster. Non-point source pollution occurs when rainfall or snowmelt or irrigation runs over the land and through the ground and picks up pollutants and deposits them in our rivers and lakes, or introduces them into our groundwater. This term does not include agricultural runoff and stormwater discharges from agricultural areas or return flows from irrigation, because they are not covered under the Clean Water Act. There are very limited point source pollution, point sources for pollution on the Carson River. In fact, there pretty much aren't any, except for if there's an accidental spill of some sort, or if you have like a confined animal feeding operation. Most of those are down in the Fallon area. Okay. So as you can see, we do have a lot of historical human impacts. I just wanted to show you some of the signs that have been put up in Carson City, probably about 2 years ago. Is that, that long? Okay. About the fish, don't eat the fish because of the Carson River mercury site there. So virtually every mile of the Carson River has been impacted by human activity. These mills and mines have caused many long-term problems, and they're still trying to figure out really what to do with the Carson River mercury site. I think one of the main things is they, during flooding, they don't want they don't want the mercury to move, because it moves every time it floods, because we get erosion and things like that. So they want to do river projects that are going to stabilize those banks to keep the mercury in place. And that's probably going to be the long-term solution that the EPA proposes. Also, in the 60s, the river was channelized quite extensively, and that straightening of it caused a lot of incision. And so that's why you see, I don't know if you cross Cradleball Bridge and you look to the left, there's just huge cut banks. But in those incisions, those straightening of the river in certain spots, and that particularly is one site where they straightened it so that it would go under that bridge and stay only under that bridge, is an area where you get a lot of that erosion and incision. All right. So some of the current impacts we have, and we've got listed these in the 208 plan as well, are stormwater runoff. We have contaminant plumes, septic tank issues. We have wastewater treatment facilities that discharge into our groundwater. In relation to urban stormwater, CWSD has been working on ways to teach and incentivize urban homeowners and businesses to infiltrate their snow, their stormwater runoff, and their irrigation on site so that they're not impacting, it's not getting into our storm drains, and then it's not getting into our river. We do have that goal, that's called low impact development, and we do have a white paper on it, and I think I did a presentation to the Board of Supervisors a couple years back on that. All right. So CWSD funds and supports the work of our counties and our conservation districts to implement stabilization, bank stabilization, and rehabilitation projects. Projects that were completed in Carson City was a project, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's right below Lloyd's Bridge, where they removed, they did the dam removal, and then they did some stabilization there, and that was very successful. We've also done some stormwater and trail project off Golden Eagle Lane. CWSD also assists in administering funding for riparian habitat rehabilitation, and that goes along with the invasive species. So outreach and education. Our main vision is the Carson River community that believes their behavior impacts watershed wellness and applies their knowledge to act in ways that benefit the watershed as a whole. This is a good example this is the Carson Montessori students out at Snapshot Day. Snapshot Day is an educational event where the students get to do water quality sampling, and they do it at 11 sites along the river at the same time on the same day. That's why it's called Snapshot. It's a snapshot in time. And this is particularly just at Lloyd's Bridge or at Carson River Park. So these are just some of the various, these points on the slide are some of the various things that CWSD is involved when it comes to educational activities, and a lot of this is available on our website. We have, I didn't bring one, I can't believe I didn't bring one, but we have an amazing watershed map if you haven't seen it. It's very kid-friendly, but it also has a lot of information for adults on it on the back side. It also has a timeline of river events on the back. And that is also online. There's an online version where you can kind of click on something and then it opens up and it'll tell you about that particular thing that you click on, and whether it's a site, a recreational site, or it's an animal in the watershed, or what it is. So it's really good for both adults and kids alike. We also have recently, probably in 2015, we did a watershed survey about watershed issues, and we are basing a lot of our watershed literacy campaign off that watershed survey that was completed then. We will be coming out with a pretty a watershed campaign fairly shortly. Probably we're working with Neon Agency up in Reno, out of Reno. On a very big effort to just get people to know a little bit more about the watershed and what are these challenges that we're facing. What Next, water quantity. So ensuring there's enough water in the system for the myriad of needs is a critical piece of the story. The waters of the Carson River Basin are fully allocated, and there is little water available during droughts for in-stream flows to maintain wildlife and ecological processes. CWSD does have, and we own the water rights up in Lost Lakes, which is in Alpine County, right along the Pacific Crest Trail, sorry. And it's at the top of West Fork. And it provides late stream or late season flows through Hope Valley, which they appreciate from a recreational standpoint. But we also, then that water is used for M&I further down for municipal and industrial uses. And Carson City actually is often the recipient of that water late season for M&I purposes. So recreation is the last but not least. And I think it's really important that we do consider this and that everybody is, really interested in making sure that the public has access to this amazing resource. Because there's still a lot of people who don't even know that there's a river near us, and they don't know how amazing it is when you go down there. And I think in Carson City, you guys have done an amazing job of providing access to the public to the river. And a number of projects that we've helped fund, CWSD has helped fund, are like the Carson River Park, the Bailey Fishing Pond, and also it's going to be going to our board, I think, this month there's a recommendation to provide funding and to sign the contract for the Mexican Dam Portage Project. So that's a trail so that people can portage around the Mexican Dam. So that's exciting. So I think that's it, and I know that was a lot of information to throw out there. I actually changed my slide, and then I realized that I couldn't do that for public. But we also have just recently, and you may have seen them, we worked with NDOT to actually sign the watershed on the Nevada side, so that you're entering the Carson River watershed. And so I had a new sign up. But I hope you have seen them around. We haven't been able to work with Caltrans yet. That's a whole nother project. But we're going to work on it. But I wanted just to let you know that you can ask me any questions, but we're happy to come back if there's anything that, specifically that you wanted to hear more about. That I brought up, because it was a broad overview.
Thank you, Brenda. Are there any questions? Any public comment? Public is thinning. Okay, thank you very much.
No worries.
Awfully broad and comprehensive group of programs.
Thank you, yes.
Okay. Next item, 3E, I'm sorry, for discussion only, Lindsay Boyer, presentation by the Carson City Weed Coalition.
Okay, good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is Lindsay Boyer, and I'm the Senior Natural Resource Specialist for Carson City Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. I'm actually giving this presentation tonight kind of as the acting Carson City Weed Coalition Coordinator. Our current Weed Coalition Coordinator, Marina Disbrow, actually accepted a full-time position in Denver, Colorado as the Urban Agriculture and Noxious Weed Coordinator. So she will be relocating, and so I just wanted to publicly acknowledge all of her accomplishments and hard work that she's put in over the last year. She's really made a lot of strides in the program, so I will be presenting those tonight. So for those of you who may not know, the Carson City Weed Coalition is a group of individuals comprised of federal, state, local agencies, even some private homeowners here in Carson City, who are all concerned with the spread of noxious and invasive weeds in Carson City and the Carson River watershed as a whole. So with Brenda's last presentation, she did kind of outline why noxious weed control is important, so we'll go into that tonight. And then I also wanted to kind of share with you some of our accomplishments in terms of treatments and outreach and some projects we have going on. So why is noxious weed control important? All of these items were mentioned by Brenda. I think one thing she may not have mentioned, which I wanted to add, is that there's also an increased fire, risk of fire frequency and intensity with noxious weeds. These plants tend to have a lot of dry material at the end of season and can be really dangerous in terms of starting fires and also just furthering fires once they start if they end up in an area. Typically, these plants will just lay down years and years of material, and it's really challenging to break down. So I think that's another thing to mention. But again, loss of biodiversity, losing our native plants that are so crucial for wildlife habitat or for maintaining the river and water quality. And she, going along with water quality, she mentioned, altering hydrologic conditions. A lot of these plants have root structures that tend to break up the soil and can cause a lot more, sediment into the river and flooding issues there as well. So these noxious weeds are a huge problem in our community and in all communities, really, and it's very important that we tackle them. So this is a map of a portion of Carson City. Mainly this is the river corridor. That's where we see the biggest infestations. A lot of these plants are transported via water, so that's how they end up in the river corridor. So in all of these highlighted areas, we have done extensive monitoring, and in some of these cases, we've done treatments as well, either being with herbicide or physical removal. So in total, monitoring and treatment combined, we have surveyed and implemented treatment on nearly 750 acres in both parks and open space here in Carson City. So we're very much keeping a pulse on the noxious weed issue and doing what we can with the funding that we have to get some treatments done. Kind of a novel project that Marina helped bring into the program and implement was a biological control experiment targeting the perennial plant called Canada thistle. This is a huge problem in our riparian areas. It has a very extensive root system and can just completely take over and inundate an area. This picture on the left is taken at Morgan Mill Preserve. And so that area does have a big issue with Canada thistle, just being that it's right next to the river. So working with some local and non-local partners, a few different Department of Agriculture employees, we learned about this rust fungus that specifically targets Canada thistle only. And so what happens with this fungus is it, has co-occurred with this plant for some time. And when the plant is inoculated with this fungus, essentially, it's not able to reproduce effectively. And in Colorado, where they first kind of started implementing this project, they've seen 80 to 90% reductions in stands over, a 3-year period. So it is kind of a long game. But the benefits here are that it's a non-chemical form of control. The Weed Coalition really tries to focus on integrated pest management, which is using a variety of control methods to tackle weeds so that we're not always just relying on chemical means for control. So, using physical removal and alternatives like biological controls when they're appropriate. And the other cool thing about this particular fungus is that it's naturally occurring. It doesn't impact wildlife, dogs, or other plants. So it's very much targeted to this specific species. So this experiment, we inoculated a few test sites along the Carson River last fall. And we are doing some monitoring this spring to see if it was successful. And if we didn't see inoculation this year, we're going to go ahead and try it again. Sometimes it takes a couple years to take, but we're working with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and they give us the fungus for free. So really no harm in continuing to implement a treatment like this. So the kind of plan for the 2019 treatments, we are really trying to hone targeting things when it's most phenologically appropriate. So trying to target things kind of in between, either prior to it flowering, if it's an annual plant, or if it's a perennial plant, trying to focus in on that time period kind of later in the season when it's drawing its resources back down into the roots, because those are the most effective times to treat those particular plants. So really trying, rather than just spraying once a year and calling it good, really trying to hone what we're doing and when we're doing it as it applies to the plant at hand, so that we can be more successful with our treatments. And we're doing a lot more monitoring as well to see how effective these kinds of approaches are. And one thing we're starting to do this year, because we have a little bit more manpower with the Carson City Open Space Maintenance Coordinator, we are doing a lot of mechanical treatments and then coupling that with a chemical treatment if appropriate, which is a much more effective means of control as well. We also like to do a lot of outreach. So in 2018 was a big outreach year, and we're going to kind of continue with the same amount of events here in 2019 now that we're in the spring season. But just a few things to mention. We do a lot of guided interpretive hikes where we take people out to look at the weeds growing and talk about the problems and how they can best control them. We have done a community weeds workshop where we invite members of the public to come, and we teach them about both noxious and nuisance weeds and their impacts and how they can deal with them in their own communities. We do volunteer weed removal. We've participated in things like Safety Day, talking to the public about the importance of herbicide safety. So we really try to get the word out as much as possible and to as many different types of people and age groups as possible as well. So kind of continuing into 2019, things that we've already done, we always participate in Capital City Farm Days, so teaching kids, especially at a young age, about weeds and how detrimental they can be. We currently have a library display. June is actually Invasive Species Awareness Month, so that's a place where members of the community can go and get more information. We'll be doing some weed removal events coming up as well. And we try to teach kids as much as possible as well. So the picture below is working with river wranglers. We did an event where we taught kids about invasive and noxious weeds, and we actually had them out pulling weeds as well. And so that has been a really effective strategy for us. One big area I think Marina made a lot of strides in during her tenure with us was she developed an extensive amount of education and outreach materials. So she developed, also working with our AmeriCorps Vista, this Noxious Weed Wranglers coloring and information book. So we pass those out at all of our education events. She also worked on kind of these noxious weed profiles for puncture vine and yellow star, and we'll be continuing that with all of our main species. So geared more towards adults and species specific. We get a lot of questions about puncture vine, goat heads. They're a huge pain. So we want to try to get as much information out to the public as possible. And then another great stride that she made there in the middle is kind of what we are calling a door hanger. And so this is something that, working with Carson City code enforcement, we developed kind of this pamphlet that we fill out in advance for folks who have noxious weeds on their property. And then we provide those materials to code enforcement, and they actually go and make the connection and that contact with the individual. Since they have a little bit more teeth than we do, they're able to follow up on these things and ensure compliance. So that's something that we're kind of piloting this year to see how it'll work. But I'm really hopeful that we'll see more compliance with our private and commercial properties, because that's kind of our biggest area. We have no control over what they do. All we can do is inform them. So hopefully, working with code enforcement, we can get a little bit more done. So some ongoing projects, we're gearing up for treatments. They're happening right now for spring treatments, and we'll be doing fall treatments too on those perennial plants that are most appropriate. We're also doing quite a bit of restoration where we can, especially along the river, trying to get those desirable species to grow again. Extensive surveying every year to see how our treatments are working and if there's any new infestations. We do a lot of outreach to homeowners, as I've mentioned, that whole process with code enforcement. Another stride that Marina made is she developed kind of the draft of the Carson City Weed Coalition Management Plan. So just bringing the program up to a really high level with everything that is encompassed in the program, from the education and outreach component to our protocol with code enforcement to our specific management plans for each property that we work on. And again, continuing with those community workshops and just trying to get the information out to the public. And then we're always looking for grant funds to fund our program as well. So there will be some searching for grant funds, over the next year and in the future. But with any project, of course, collaboration is key. So we really value and depend on our partners to help get these treatments done. So this is a picture actually working with Donna and Muscle Powered. We did a bull thistle pull up at Horse Creek Ranch, which is an area that open space holds a conservation easement. And we hope to do more volunteer pulls like that, working with Muscle Powered in the future if possible. And I mentioned River Wranglers too. CWSD, we have so many partners who are so helpful and integral in getting this work done. So I wanted to acknowledge them as well. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any questions of Lindsay? Yes.
I'm curious about, you mentioned chemical treatments, and it looks like from the map, there's a lot of areas along the river that may be eligible for that type of work. What are the runoff impacts of your herbicide usage in those areas, and what do you do to mitigate those?
That's a very good question. So each herbicide label comes with kind of recommendations, how close they can be used by water, if it's up to the water's edge, or if there's a certain, buffer zone. So we pay attention to what the label says. And then we also like to be overly cautious. So in areas where, the bank is very much close to the river, we'll try to avoid spraying in those areas because we are concerned about runoff just in general. As Brenda was just talking about, that is a concern. And so we are very mindful of that. And in areas where we feel like runoff isn't or is unavoidable, then we'll either not spray or just work on mechanical treatments in that area.
Quick follow-up, are there any, do you do any testing of the water quality testing to determine if you have had an effect?
Yeah, another great question. The Weed Coalition hasn't done any testing that I'm aware of, but we do work, again, with CWSD in their snapshot day that they've done, I think, the last 15 or 16 years. And so there is a water quality testing element associated with that. But we don't do any post-treatment water quality testing, but I think that would be a great thing to implement.
Any other comments or questions for Lindsay?
I have one.
Yes,
And
Joanne.
forgive me if I'm supposed to already know this, but the Weed Coalition, we have one part-time staff member that works under the Open Space Division, but it's a coalition consisting of private landowners and other agencies, but what's just kind of spearheaded by this part-time person. Okay, and then you talk about surveying 750 acres for noxious weeds. Are you doing that on both private land and open space land, or only on open space land, or how's this all kind of fit together?
Yes, good question. So, yeah, to answer your question, we have one part-time coordinator. That position is primarily funded by funds from CWSD, from that $15,000 that they give us every year, and partially funded by open space as well. And so the coordinator's role is basically to oversee this whole program. And as you mentioned, we're not only working on city property or parks and open space. It is, being a liaison with homeowners and commercial properties as well. So the way that I see the coordinator position is kind of being the point person citywide, kind of keeping a pulse on what the weed issues are. We work with Public Works a lot as well to coordinate treatments there. And then also, the piece with the other people who are in the coalition, the other agency members, finding out, what it is that they're doing and working on and how we can best collaborate and make sure that we're kind of covering Carson City as a whole. So open space and the city kind of houses the position and provides administrative needs and a roof and a computer and that kind of stuff. But then the position and the person does work, beyond just city-owned property. And then your other question, the 750 acres that was outlined, that's primarily just referring to open space and parks property. But we do, as we're driving around and we notice noxious weed issues, those are what's getting reported to code enforcement, but I don't believe that was what was incorporated into her acreage figure, so.
Thank you. Noxious weeds are a big deal for open space and something we really need to pay attention to. Are there any public comments? All right.
I just have one more question. Okay, just looking at your report then, like for 2017 through 2018, it looks like we had like $29,000 in grant funding. Is that literally all the money that we have to support this program and the half-time staff person? And we're an open space where we feel that noxious weeds in our open space is a big issue in our community, and we have 60,000 acres of open space. Just seems to me like, do we have any city funding? It just seems like this is going to be an important issue to us. Like, we should have more support.
Yes, I totally agree.
How do we do that?
Yeah, the program needs more money. The most consistent funding that we get is that $15,000 from CWSD. That's pretty much guaranteed at this point, as well as the component that open space contributes, which is about $5,000. All the other grant funding that we have is ephemeral, essentially. We don't currently have $29,000 in grant funding. We have about 10, and that'll be spent up by the end of the year. So yeah, it is definitely a big issue, and funding and support are necessary. And the nature of grants is that they come and go, and sometimes we have lots and sometimes we have a little, and we kind of do what we can with what we have. And, obviously having a full-time person dedicated to this issue would just increase our efficiency immensely. So I do think that this is a big issue, and that, hopefully someday we can acquire some more consistent funding.
So I take it we're looking for somebody to replace?
Yes, we are. Yeah, today was her last day, and so we're working on getting that position posted, and we'll be backfilling her as soon as possible. So if anybody knows someone who might be qualified, send them my way.
I just want to really thank what group is code enforcement under?
Carson City?
Is it Carson City Public Works or? Community Development. Well, I think that they need a great big hoorah because there are a lot of communities around Nevada where there is nobody doing anything about it. And with the Carson City Weed Coalition and code enforcement, they're actually making some inroads. So I just want to make sure that they get some recognition. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to our next agenda item. Lindsay, don't move. Presentation regarding Carson City's Bee City USA designation. Lindsay.
Okay, so again, for the record, Lindsay Boyer, Senior Natural Resource Specialist, rolling right along into our next topic. I'm here tonight to share with you some information about Carson City's recent designation as a Bee City USA affiliate. The Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to designate us as a Bee City USA on October 18th of 2018. So before I go into kind of what the Bee City USA program is all about and what that means for Carson City, I just kind of wanted to set the stage with a little information about pollinators and their importance within the world, really. So 85% of the world's flowering plants, with more than 2/3 of those being crop species, are pollinated by bees, butterflies, or some other pollinating species. So this includes important crops like fruits, vegetables, nuts, coffee, alfalfa. It's nearly 100 crops in the U.S. alone and a $3 billion industry. And in addition to humans, the fruits of pollinators help feed up to 25% of wildlife as well. So the pollinator species that we have are just essential to our environment and to our own health and success. Without them, we really would have a very limited pool of food to choose from. But unfortunately, bees and pollinators have been experiencing population declines for some time. This is due to everything from habitat loss, the spread of pests and diseases, issues with our monoculture crop systems, as well as the misuse or overuse of herbicide. So for, commercial beekeeping specifically, which does, contribute to most of our food that we eat, they've seen up to 30% of their colonies die since 2006. So there's pretty significant declines in pollinator populations. And communities across the United States are kind of doing what they can to help promote pollinator populations and help conserve them. So with that, there was the creation of the Bee City USA program. So the Bee City USA program serves to promote healthy and sustainable habitat in order to support vital pollinator populations for the benefit of our health and economy. So they got started kind of as a grassroots organization based out of North Carolina, and the program has really taken off from there. So what this program is all about is basically pollinator education and pollinator conservation in communities. So trying to teach residents about what they can do in their own homes to help promote pollinator populations, and extending that to local governments as well. So first and foremost, this is basically a commitment to the cause of pollinator conservation. And this is done through a lot of education primarily. So some things that the Bee City USA program focuses on, for example, are getting out, talking to the community about the importance of pollinators, like I'm doing today, and informing the public about their declines. I don't think a lot of people know about that specifically. So, a lot of curriculum, a lot of education is going into spreading the words about pollinator conservation and what we can do to help. But the Bee City USA program also does kind of endorse a set of commitments that help contribute to pollinator conservation as well. So some of these commitments, which are things that we've already started implementing since becoming a Bee City USA, is really promoting pollinator habitat development as a first and foremost goal. So since our designation, I've started incorporating a lot more pollinator-friendly species into our restoration seed mixes, which was something we were already doing, but just really trying to increase that focus. I've also created a really extensive pollinator-friendly plant species list, which has been distributed to some of the developers that we're working with in the city. And working with community development, they've really tried to push this pollinator-friendly species list, and we've actually seen a lot of buy-in from developers on including these things. One of our developments is actually going to have a pollinator garden incorporated into it. Speaking of pollinator gardens, after we became a Bee City USA affiliate, the Chamber Leadership Group kind of got a hold of this idea and they just ran with it. And for those of you who don't know, we just recently unveiled a bee hotel up at the Foothill Garden. So this is essentially a habitat for bees and a place of education as well. So for those who haven't seen it yet, I definitely recommend taking a drive up there to the Foothill Trail, just behind the Cancer Center, and taking a look at this amazing structure that will provide a home for lots of bees and a place of education and of promoting pollinator conservation. And that's actually coupled with a pollinator garden that our AmeriCorps Vista Community Education Coordinator, Kelsey Stalker, has been working on putting together too. So it really kind of overnight became this place of like awesome pollinator education and promotion, which is very cool. And there's some other, kind of things that we would like to strive to improve on. I mentioned integrated pest management. I think we can always try to use as many tools in our toolbox as we have available to not only rely on herbicide, but sometimes it is necessary, and the Bee City USA program acknowledges that as well. So it's not necessarily a prohibition of certain activities, but just really encouraging us to make the right choices where we can for pollinators. So again, ultimately, Carson City has fully committed to the cause of pollinator conservation. We were the first ones in Nevada to make this designation. We were 76, thank you. We were number 76. So there were, 75 communities before us who chose to make this happen. But yeah, the first one in Nevada. But ultimately, these small actions that we're taking can really help ensure the survival of a crucial wildlife species. So again, with that, I will accept questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Lindsay? Yes.
Thank you for that. Are there any incentives for like businesses that plant or do landscaping that's bee friendly, or do we recognize them in any way as contributing to our Bee City designation?
So far, since we're so new, we don't, have any particular incentives, but I think watching the Chamber Leadership Group jump on it and develop this bee hotel, there were so many businesses that contributed money towards that, and they're recognized on, there's like little logo things that are attached to the bee hotel. So that's kind of, I think, our first step in recognizing businesses for their commitment to the cause as well. But there is a lot of reporting and things and sharing, nationwide what we're doing with the rest of the Bee City communities. So I think as more and more businesses jump on this as well, we'll definitely recognize them for their efforts.
Are any of the local nurseries involved in this?
Yes, definitely. So the greenhouse project was integral in designing the pollinator garden that goes along with the bee hotel. And we've engaged the greenhouse project as well. That's right where the bee hotel is. And we're actually developing a partnership with them where they're going to start growing up some native pollinator-friendly plant species for us in the greenhouse to then be planted out elsewhere. So that's a pilot project that's underway right now.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any other comments or questions? Alan?
Does your bee hotel include habitat for mason bees?
If I'm not mistaken, the whole thing is for mason bees, and maybe some leaf cutter bees. So yes, I believe so.
Okay, any public comment? All right. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Our next item is another discussion item, review and discussion regarding an update on the process towards creation of a conceptual plan and potential management strategies for the Prison Hill Recreation Area. Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Ann Bollinger, Open Space Administrator. At the last meeting of the Open Space Advisory Committee, a similar item was on the agenda for discussion. But the Prison Hill Recreation Area consists of not just the hill itself, 2,500 acres, but also trailheads and access points around the hill. And because of that, some of the areas, if you will, for a lack of a better term, under the jurisdiction of Parks and Public Works, and primarily that is an area from the fence line to the west, so where the water tanks are, Coons Lane, Clearview. And over the last couple of years, and I think really unfortunately since the area transferred from BLM to Carson City, it has really just been hammered by significant weather events, increased recreation, and deferred maintenance. And so Member Masad asked staff for help, essentially. What can we do to improve this area? It is the access point to Prison Hill. It's the most popular trailheads on the west side. And so working with Greg Berggren, our trails coordinator, and Vern Cron, our park planner, we sat in the conference room, brainstormed ideas, looked at maps, and identified survey questions. Recently, we talked so much about surveys, but it has really become the best tool to get feedback from the public. What I was hoping for tonight is that I could direct you all to a survey online. The survey is completed, but the Survey Monkey tool that we traditionally use has a flaw right now. If it cannot be figured out this week, we will look at Plan B, and the city on our website, there's a tool in there, but Dan Arp, some of you know Dan Arp, Recreation Superintendent, he's the most knowledgeable one about these various survey tools, but he will work with us and get the survey up one way or another. I was hoping it would be tonight and I could direct you to a source, but it won't be. As soon as it is, we will send an email, and we would really encourage you to participate. The survey will talk all about Prison Hill, about all of the trailheads and access points. What does the public want to see for amenities and access? Some areas, as noted in your staff report, have some active planning efforts right now. So this next effort is complementary as well. And with that, so from the last open space, they asked to bring this item back to the joint meeting for further discussion and questions from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Are there comments or questions, discussion with regard to the process or the trailhead, trail area process, I guess? All right. Keep going.
That's all I have, so I will just ask for you to complete that survey when it comes through your inbox.
Yeah, that survey can be very important to getting input for this process, so.
I do have a question.
Yes, Donna.
So this is a survey that's going to go out to the public?
Correct.
And how is it going to be advertised?
We will use all of our sources. We will use Facebook. I think we have Twitter. Vern has drafted a press release. To the adjacent neighbors, following the Carson City planning noticing requirements, we will send letters out to the adjacent neighbors as well as post it on the trailheads. If you have any other ideas, I will certainly
Carson
listen.
Now, let Muscle Powered know, we'll put it on our Facebook
Great, thank you.
page so that it'll get out to to all of our people too. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment? Yes, please come forward.
My name's Ron Bratch. I live on Golden Eagle Lane, and I'm adjacent to open space. What's the survey about? I have no idea. I didn't catch what you're surveying.
The primary goal is a conceptual master plan for the west side of Prison Hill, so Coons Lane, Clearview. But the survey will include all the access points, so even the Fifth Street trailhead that's under construction right now. We'll look at Sinbad, Coons, Clearview, the Bennett pedestrian access point, Snyder, Golden Eagle Lane to the motorized area, and just, it's a very general question, saying these are trailheads and access points, what amenities should we provide?
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just curious, because of where I live. Thanks.
Oh, glad you came. And any other questions?
No, I had a bunch, but they're more specific to where I live than open space, because I'm in a unique spot. I live next to open space. I live on the Colorado River. I have an island, so I have, I'm sure, all kinds of nasty species on it, because I can't even access it. It's across the river from my property. So, but it's an island in the spring when there's a channel going back through the backside. So, yeah, there's lots of things, and I'm getting educated. So, isn't that what this is about?
Okay, well, thank you, and please feel free to talk to staff and further that education process. We need people interested and, committed to our open space and maintenance of the quality of life, so it's great.
No, I appreciate it, and yeah, like I said, it's very educational. I'm glad I came tonight, and I'm learning a lot. It's more I'm sponging right now, trying to absorb and sort it out, and what are the questions to ask, rather than what I'm thinking off the top of my head. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on that? All right. Next item, staff updates. Director's report, non-substantive update regarding departmental projects, programs, and grants, legislative update, and Board of Supervisors action items. You're going to summarize quickly, right, Jennifer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Bedge, I know everybody wants to go home, they're tired and hungry. Just a couple things under construction. Ann pointed out that Fifth Street Trailhead is under construction. The Ross School Park Playground is almost in completion. They're putting the tiles right now down. It's really amazing. So we'll let you know when that's complete, so you can go see that. And then we have the remaining bridges in Mills Park are under construction as well, long overdue, more than 30 years old. So really great projects. Also, Schultz Ranch Park is almost complete, and we have a tentative ribbon cutting scheduled for July 30th. So put that on your calendars. I'll email, when that's confirmed, I'll email that out to everyone, but I just wanted to let you know. And then for legislative updates, the reauthorization of park bonds, which was originally the state question 1 from 2002, that was AB 84, and that did pass. So.
Has the governor signed that yet?
Yes, he has.
I think you sent a legislative summary out earlier this afternoon, so.
I did. I only sent it to the chairs. It was pretty comprehensive, but I wanted to just make sure that you had information about the other items that we've talked about previously. And then if there's something that sparks your interest, I thought you could ask me to bring it to one of the future meetings. And that's all I have.
I just have one other comment about the report. The 137 single-family homes on Airport Road, isn't that awful waterlogged property? When I drive by there, there's a...
Which report are you talking about, Donna?
The Board of Supervisors report is...
Oh, action items?
Yeah, the community development planning part on the first page. 137 single-family lots, homes on Airport Road. It was the second item.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's on there. It wasn't related. Yeah, but it wasn't,
I don't know, it's popped up a couple of times, and every
Sure.
time I see it, I go, there's a river running through there. How are they gonna put all those homes in there?
yeah, I don't think we had any,
We don't have anything to do with it, but
outstanding.
it just.
No, and that's an error. It shouldn't be on there. I apologize.
Yeah. Anyway.
Margie, did you have something?
How do you just copy it?
I have two questions. Number one, you mentioned our trails coordinator. Has the full-time position been filled yet?
The Trails Coordinator position was offered to Greg Bergeron, who was our existing part-time staff person. That's fully funded, full-time, 75% from open space, 25% from the general fund, and that'll be effective July 1st.
Thank you. And then I wanted to ask, this may be more a question for Greg because it's trails related, but I was up at Lake Tahoe earlier last week. This is early this week. I was up there last week, and we received a notice of the ribbon cutting ceremony that's going to occur there. I wanted to know where the Carson City where in process is the Carson City phase?
Yes, I can answer that. So the Carson City phase, and I don't even know what phase it is at this point, it is under planning and design right now, and that Carson City phase is from Sand Harbor to Spooner, 8 miles of paved pathway. The Forest Service is the primary federal agency within that stretch, so they are the lead on the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act documents, as well as TRPA, because there's a lot more governmental oversight up in the basin. That document is being drafted. We have provided comments. I think that was on 30 or 60%. The document should be completed, I think, in September this year. Construction, I don't know, but at least the NEPA will be done. And one of the last meetings that we were so privileged to have with everyone in the group was at the Thunderbird Lodge up at Lake Tahoe. And the Thunderbird Lodge is an amazing supporter of this project. They're actually really looking forward to the trail coming past the entrance there, looking at opportunities for additional tourism into Thunderbird Lodge. So there's amazing support up at the basin on this project. I'll make sure we have a timeline.
Well, for those of you who are interested, the part that's completed and about ready to be opened looks like tons of fun. And it's so beautiful, and it's right out over the lake in places. Very, very cool.
Thank you. Jennifer, anything else? Any other questions or comments on the updates? Okay. Moving on to number 5, member announcements and requests for information. Donna.
You go first. Open Space has probably heard this more than they would like to, but I wanted to make sure Parks Rec heard it. This is an update on the movement to create the Virginia and Truckee Rail Trail. We've made remarkable progress. We now have an official name. It's the Historic Virginia and Truckee Trail. We had 1-year grant from National Park Services, Rivers Trails, and I'm brain dead, RTCA grant.
Conservation assistance.
Yeah, we got a 2nd-year grant, but unfortunately, the minute we were awarded the grant, the government shut down. Then our planner quit. They just this week posted that position finally. So I got an email from Barbara Rice, would I like to apply for the grant again next year? So I'm going to be applying for the grant again next year. And of course, with AB 84 being approved, we now have an opportunity to apply for a lot of grant money for that trail. We actually received an inheritance gift to form the new nonprofit to support that trail. Douglas County has put their portion of the trail on their master plan. That would be from the Carson River to the end of where the train ended, which is at the doors of the new distillery. Which is,
They did that on purpose. Come have a drink.
Bentley did that on purpose. He wants the trail to end at his doors. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring it here is informing the new nonprofit to support the trail, which is going to go from Minden to downtown Reno and from downtown Carson City to downtown Virginia City, is forming the new board. We're looking for board members who are interested in becoming board members, especially from Lyon, Story, and Washoe counties. So if you know of anybody you think would be good supporters for this rail trail and be eager to be board members, please have them contact me or Juan Guzman. And so we're very excited that we've gotten this far. I was on the phone today with the National Rails to Trails Conservancy. They're very excited about it. He's asked me to provide 2 blogs to be put into the national blog, one on the AB 84 legislation and one on this project, and the maps to get into the trail link for what we've got completed or are about to complete. So it's very exciting.
Great, thank you.
Jennifer, you just love it when I talk, don't you? 3 things. I was in Sonoma Park the other day, and one of the trees is dead, so we probably need to remove it and replace it. It's by the south entrance. And then I have been approached by a number of parents on 2 different issues. One is the signage over at Governor's Field. They want to know, due to confusion about the field layout this past softball season, t-ball season, whatever it is, if maybe on the gate we could put a map detailing where all the different fields are. They were telling me that the fields are not very well labeled, and it's not that I didn't trust them, but I drove through and they were absolutely correct. So they were hoping we could either put a sign on the gate or maybe better label the fields so that they're more easily identifiable. And then a group of parents approached me about graduation. There seems to be some hurt feelings. Their feeling was, or what they were told was, that graduation had to be moved to 9 o'clock Saturday to accommodate the state fair. And they were told they couldn't park in Mills Park as overflow parking. And I don't know whether or not that's any truth to that. I don't have a child in the high school system, but maybe next year we could work with the high school and the state fair to make sure that there's no hurt feelings or confusion.
So are you talking about graduation at the high school or WNC graduation that's at
high
Mills Park?
school last Saturday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were told, pardon? Yeah, as the fair. Yeah, they were told that because of the fair, graduation was moved from 10 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And that the state fair organizer didn't want anybody from graduation parking in the fairground because it might impact the people attending the fair.
Okay.
So
We'll follow up with the school district and we'll be having a post-event meeting with the fair anyway.
Okay.
We've had traditionally several issues with the state fair event at Mills Park, and we've been trying to work with the event organizer to mitigate those. So if it's further impacting the school district, that's important to know.
It was, they were very upset. It was like, wow. Not having a child in the school system at this point, it was a surprise to me, and I told them that I would bring it up and that.
Yeah,
we would
I will
certainly-
follow up on all these items.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
ever
you
so
so
much.
much.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Okay, any other member announcements? Yes.
I have a request for the smoking and vaping portion of the discussion that we might be having. I was informed that it's come up before, it's before my time, but if we could get like the minutes and the things that came up just to read before, and that would be good for Parks and Rec and for Open Space and any other local entities that have had that discussion, just to have that, I don't know, so we don't rehash the same discussion. Thanks.
For reference, I think it's the meeting from October 7th, 2014, and it was item 3E.
Be more specific?
Geez, Brett, you got total recall.
Okay.
We can punt and do it later.
Any other announcements or requests for information from members? Okay, future agenda items. We've identified a couple tonight, but anything else anybody would like to request?
Is there anything in particular from the joint perspective? All of the items, with the exception of the archery range, were all items that you had previously requested. So staff really worked to try to honor those requests. I know it was a really lengthy meeting. We only get together twice a year. That's definitely not our goal to keep you here at all hours. But is there other topics that you'd like to see at that future meeting? You can either let me know now or, go through the chairs to request, an agenda item.
Okay. Anybody have anything at this point? All right, but please feel free to, communicate with Ann or Jennifer regarding future agenda item matters. And Ben, we'd appreciate if you didn't extend the meeting the way you have tonight by all your comments. Okay. Final chance, now that we've got two publics. Any final public comment? All right, Lindsay, you're kind of a hybrid public, but you're sitting out there, so.
If she's out there, she's public.
Okay. Possible action on adjournment. I think adjournment is pretty probable, not possible, so. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.